as I said, I was very excited to get to view his talk even though I couldn't be there. And he gave a well-reasoned argument that suggested that you can't really measure critical thinking with a multiple choice test because, and this is a pretty persuasive idea here, you have to be able to hear the students thinking if it's out loud or be able to read their thinking in a written form. And he made the point that not all no answers or yes answers are equal, that a student could give maybe the wrong answer but have a really good basis for it that would, in a sense, if you're going to quantify this, give that person more points than a person who didn't have a clue what they were talking about. Right? And I thought that was an excellent point. I do agree that it's desirable to assess critical thinking with those formats. I find that when I read something my students haven't written, I can get an insight into how they're thinking, and I can take corrective action. That's really helpful. Of course, there is a downside in that if we're trying to assess this, it's quite time-consuming. And since probably every instructor is going to want to be assessing critical thinking for the purposes of our institutional assessment, that could be problematic for some people. So I'm going to make the case that you can measure some of these critical thinking skills with multiple choice tests. Again, I am quite sympathetic that it's nice to be able to do it and see how students are thinking. But in cases where the thought process has to lead you to an inevitable conclusion, the students either get to that conclusion or they don't. And the fact that they made it to the right conclusion and got the right answer can tell us that they hit the thought process just about right. Right? So not everything is in the way of multiple choice has to be omitted. In fact, what I'm going to do is take these different points that all seem to feed into analyzing and evaluating arguments and show you a multiple choice question for each one of them. Okay? So, and where did I get this list? I sort of, again, was doing some of that synthesis. I looked for the different points that those three tests and their manuals use to try to describe this area, analyzing and evaluating arguments. Because to me, it seems that more than any other skill, this seems to be at the crux of what is meant by critical thinking in most of the things I've read. Okay, so we're going to look at distinguishing component parts of an argument, assessing the strength and relevance of arguments, evaluating the credibility of evidence or statements, recognizing assumptions and inferences, identifying informal fallacies, and identifying sound arguments. So we're going to be looking at a multiple choice style item for each one of these. Okay, so the first one was distinguishing the parts of an argument. And here's a sample question. Most of these questions, by the way, have come from one of those three instruments. So these are very typical. Consider these statements. No uncommunicative people make friends easily. Ruth is not communicative. Therefore, Ruth does not make friends easily. Which of the preceding statements is the conclusion of the argument? Again, so that would feed into distinguishing the parts of an argument. If you're going to be able to analyze an argument, you need to be able to tell the difference between a premise and a conclusion. Right? So